Last night I investigated Skinwalker Ranch. My hobby is to investigate Fortean-related phenomena, and since I was in Utah I decided to investigate the outskirts of the famous ranch. One of the first things I realized is that you should never do these investigations alone. I was almost attacked by a coyote, but luckily my size and screaming deterred it. I was lucky that it was alone and not in a pack. I started the first part of my investigation at around 5 p.m. and ended it at around 8 p.m. I managed to talk to a native girl I met at the bar later that night about the history of the place, and she told me that the Skinwalkers are essentially evil white witches turned demons. She told me that long ago, when the white man first arrived, they were accompanied by evil women that would steal native babies and use them for sacrifices. The shamans of those times would have battles against the witches in remote parts, and eventually the shamans managed to cast a spell that turned the witches into skinwalkers, this shunned from their communities. To this day there are still a group of shamans and hunters that actively look for these skinwalkers. After my meeting with her at the bar, I went to my motel and got ready with the necessary gear and snacks for an all-nighter. I drove my car to right outside the corner of Skinwalker Ranch, and was greeted by a security guy asking what I was there for. I told him I'm a writer that is working on a novel about the Skinwalkers, and we talked for a bit and he warned me not to stay past midnight. He told me that one of the rules the owner of the property told him is to not investigate any weird phenomenon physically after midnight, and to just use the monitors. I told him I'd be leaving at around midnight, and we parted ways. To the left side of the ranch there is a small creek that heads up towards a hill, so I decided I would make camp there, and begin prepping my cameras and sensors. I started getting an uneasy feeling, the kind you get where you have non-stop goosebumps for like a minute straight, and feel someone or something is looking at you. I felt this uneasiness towards the bottom slope of the hill. I quickly said a prayer and drew a deep breath as I began setting everything up. Around an hour and a half had passed setting everything up, midnight was approaching. I started making my way up the hill, and desu I felt some comfort from the stream making noise. I set up my post on top of the hill and waited for any sounds. Midnight was finally here. If you've ever been to the wilderness of Utah, you realize that there are a lot of howls, and they somehow comfort you knowing that you aren't alone. However, that comforting feeling only lasted for around half an hour. I heard something that I can only describe as being a scream, and I headed into the thick of the forest. I only brought my flashlight, batteries, my stun gun and a small axe. I had around 10 throwing knives as well hidden across my body, but I knew damn well that they would be useless in a real confrontation. I slowly started making my way to the scream. This is where your body usually either fight or flights. I had never felt this before, but it felt as if my body was trembling, felt like vomiting, and also could hear my heart beat. My body was trying to get me not to go, but I managed to steel my resolve, and as I approached the place where I heard the scream, I heard something scatter in the bushes. I screamed and said, "Get the hell away from me, in the name of Jesus Christ," and I put my back towards a tree so I wouldn't be flanked. I stood there and it felt what seemed like an eternity. I was sweating and my eyes felt like they were pulsating. I could hear my heart beat so loud and my legs were shaking. This was primal fear. I managed to relax, well, more so move than relax, and started making my way to my original post. I kept looking at my peripherals, and started praying real loudly and even talking to myself. It's weird how your body and mind works when you're truly scared. One thing I began to notice was that there was no sound. I walked past the stream, and it was as if it stood still. I began having flashbacks to the times I've watched The Blair Witch Project and Hereditary, and I was constantly getting images in my head of being tortured and chopped to pieces. I managed to make my way to the top of the hill again, and found all my equipment scattered. Almost by coincidence I heard a growl at the bottom of the slope, where I felt uneasiness and saw what I thought was a wolf but smaller. It started coming up and I started screaming at it and making myself look big. I remembered about my throwing knives, and began shooting it at it. It began making lunges at me and threatening to come to where I was, but I was jumping around and screaming trying to intimidate it. I was very exhausted at the end of it, but managed to get it to leave. My nerves were on end, and I decided to call it quits. The time was around 2-ish, and I just packed my equipment in a hurry, including the cameras I had around. I blasted music on my phone to give me some company, and just started speed walking to my car. As I was packing everything into my trunk, I felt the same uneasiness I felt earlier. Goosebumps and feeling like I was being watched. I looked around my car because this where horror shit happens in the movies, but I saw nothing there. From my peripherals I could see shiny eyes on top of the hill where I was originally, but there was no way I was going to look straight at it. I started my car and drove off to my motel. In the morning, I met with the same native girl and told her of my experience. She told me that I should never head towards a scream, that witches/skinwalkers are known to entice their hunters, and lure them to their deaths. I told her yeah, in hindsight it was stupid. I went back to the ranch, and talked for a while with the security guy. He told me that he was listening to all night, because he was worried about me after he saw my car still there. He told me that he hasn't heard any scream. I joked around and told him if I died he would have gotten the blame for it. He then told me something that made my heart drop. He asked me why I chose to go to that side of the ranch, when most of the activity and research is usually done at the other side. I told him I actually went to the other side earlier yesterday, and that I originally had planned to go back to that side, but I had made a native that told me about the history of the skinwalkers, and she told me that most of the activity is on the other side and that I should set up camp at a hill, that it was easy to find, because there was a stream/creek going up. As I was telling him that story, my mind starting racing, as I saw him make this face of fear and surprise. He told me that I met a native girl at a bar, that told me the history of the skinwalkers, and told me to go to the other side of the ranch, where I would probably be alone. I knew what he was insinuating, and we just stood there in silence. He told me that skinwalkers aren't white witches, he said they're our own. I just said yeah in a quiet voice. I think he caught how I was feeling, and said that he was leaving as he had stuff to do. I said thanks and it was nice to meet him. As he left I looked back into the woods and felt myself being pulled inside. I got into my car and left. I found nothing that would lead to evidence of skinwalker contact, so although I'm hesitant to say skinwalkers don't exist, I can't stop thinking about that scream and the girl.